Good evening, good morning, and good afternoon to everyone. Welcome back to the Moderately Educated News Network. I'm here with my lovely co-host, Stefan Jones, and today we're going to be talking about COVID vaccine, its efficacy, potential issues with the vaccine, side effects, and just a whole plethora of potential topics regarding them. A little bit about, my initial take. I believe everybody should be vaccinated. I believe that's really the only way vaccines work is to help prevent transmission. Um, and this concept of essentially herd immunity. So, and with such an infectious disease such as, COVID, that spreads as easily as it does, has a high R naught value, which just indicates how many people, when you come in contact with them, how many people the virus was spread to, which was much higher than, influenza and other comparable diseases. So that being said, with it replicating on the scale that it was, likely led to many mutations, hence the variants that we see. With the COVID, it's like we were getting variants, every couple weeks at one point. So keeping all that in mind, my initial opinion is the efficacy was initially very high with Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. We did see it drop off a little bit later when with Johnson and Johnson when they released their vaccines, but all efficacy was, I think, above 60%, and I would more than like I'll take the coin flip that I don't get COVID, or even if I do, it's likely reduced symptoms, side effects, and reduced chance of death. So that's my stance on COVID vaccinations and things of that nature.
Cool. So for me, I am not vaccinated. For me, there wasn't really much of a reason or point to. So I had experienced COVID because of a significant other that came down with it. And then I ended up coming down with it by proxy. Um, Yeah, so she infected me, man. It wasn't good times, bro. That oxygen, it wasn't hitting the same, fellas, but in ladies, it wasn't hitting the same. If you ever had COVID, let us know down in the comments below. Let us know how it was for you. But for me, I definitely got through it. It was a bit of a pain, right? But my issues with the vaccines, right? Number one, this is one of the few vaccines in existence, right? Where you have to constantly get a booster like throughout the year to keep the efficacy high, right? That's just very abnormal. I'm not questioning the effectiveness of the vaccine. I think for those who need it, which typically are older people, like 50 plus with four or more comorbidities, right? Those are the people who are truly at risk from dying from COVID, as well as, even younger people that have multiple comorbidities such as diabetes, asthma, uh, and different things of that nature that put you at risk, right? And being obese, so on and so forth. So, me personally, I didn't have any of those issues. As far as like pre-existing conditions that would put me at risk for having COVID or potentially take my life. So I felt comfortable, getting a natural immunity to it and just riding it out and being perfectly fine. Those who got the job, I'm not mad at you. My dad actually works for Pfizer, so he is very big on uh making sure, family got vaccinated, especially grandparents, which that completely makes sense to me. But one thing the vaccination did not do, it didn't stop the spread necessarily, right? You could still basically be COVID positive. Your symptoms may be lessened, which the symptoms are more of a big issue if you're somebody who's more at risk because you obviously don't want to die from COVID, right? But a lot of the symptoms are very similar to flu-like symptoms, sometimes maybe a little bit worse in certain people's situations, but yeah, yeah, and then the Johnson and Johnson, that one was actually discontinued, I believe, because it was dangerous and it was causing issues with people's health and heart issues and so on and so forth. So, yeah, that Johnson and Johnson one was definitely underbaked, so I wouldn't recommend to this day that anybody take that one at all. It was one shot, whereas the other ones was like two shots and then multiple boosters. But yeah, that Johnson and Johnson was garbage, absolute garbage. But yeah, I mean, if you're at risk, get the vaccine. If you're not, then I mean, you'll be fine. Like I'm still here, I'm perfectly fine. If I was 65 or 60 or some crap and I had asthma and different stuff, like yes, get the vaccine. Let's be smart. But I don't think everybody needed it, and that's my opinion.
I would venture to say that that is just incorrect because while you are correct in saying that you may have not needed a vaccine, vaccines are not just for you. They only work where they're applied in mass, where you form this herd-like immunity, right? It greatly thwarts transmission to those endangered populations. So, although you may have not needed it if you were to have been around grandparents or were asymptomatic, went to Walmart and spread it to somebody that had comorbidities. You know, this is why we take vaccines. It while it does not stop you 100% from developing COVID, um, Moderna and Pfizer had upwards of 95% efficacy. Those, of course, can be argued depending on like what variant of COVID you look at and when it was studied and things of that nature. But to say that it doesn't have an effect on the development of COVID, and if you never develop COVID, you can't spread it, um, which is distinctly different from being asymptomatic. I would venture to say that everybody should be vaccinated for that reason because it's not just about you, it's about society at large and those people that are at risk. So, yeah.
But that's the issue, right? Is that after the vaccine's released and people were basically getting vaccinated, which there's this huge push to get people vaccinated. There are literally multiple workplaces. You can't work here unless you're vaxxed, so on and so forth. Some of the biggest companies were like, no, we're not doing all that. But quite literally, they came out and said, like, look, even if you get vaccinated, you can still spread the disease. It was darn near the same rates that COVID was spreading. The spread did not necessarily slow down, but the death rate did slow down because more people were, I guess, protected by the vaccine that needed it. But the spread did not slow down because of the vaccine. Therefore, did not slow and it didn't accelerate necessarily with those who didn't get it. I mean, at
You're
that
correct
point,
in the sense
it's
that yes, the transmission of people that develop COVID that are not valued does not change. If I have COVID and I have the vaccine and I'm still exposed to the same number of people as somebody that doesn't have the vaccine and is also infected, yes, that is true. Transmission will remain somewhat constant because I'm still passing on viral loads to these people, and it's still the same disease that has the same level of transmittability. That makes sense. That's logical, yes. But that 95% efficacy, that you're not that 95% that's not developing COVID, that is the population that's not transmitting. That's the population that is, those are the kids that are not taking COVID home to their grandparents because it never got a foothold in their system to truly infect them. And whether they were symptomatic or asymptomatic, COVID was never they were exposed to a viral load, but never it was never in a capacity. It never replicated inside their system for transmission. So yes, you're correct. It did not hamper transmission once you were infected. It stopped COVID from developing altogether at a rate of about 95%. And depending on what,
allegedly, and that's if you consistently got your boosters. The moment you stop getting boosters, which it seems like everybody has because they only got boosters when it was such a big deal, worldwide pandemic, high death rate, people freaking out. Nobody talks about booster shots anymore. Nobody cares. Literally, nobody cares. As far as herd immunity, I don't know anybody who's recently gotten a COVID booster shot. I don't know anybody. People are more worried about the flu right now than they are COVID-19, if I'm being completely honest with you. It honestly seems like after the election cycle and after, a couple years after COVID happened and things started opening back up and everything, right? It seems like people stopped caring about the vaccine. They stopped caring about boosters. They moved on with their lives. Nobody talks about COVID. Even when you go into like places like Sam's Club, Walmart, Costco, so on and so forth, these places that have pharmacies in them and offer vaccinations, one of the first ones they're talking about is the flu. They're not talking about COVID. They're talking about the flu. They're talking about hepatitis. They're talking about various different things that are not COVID related. So my question is if COVID was still such a big thing that everybody needs to be vaccinated to protect everybody, then why is that not being perpetuated now amongst society? Number one. And number two, when's the last time you got a booster shot for COVID? When?
I got the first round and then I believe two boosters afterwards. And then I recently just got my influenza vaccine as well. Don't have autism or anything just yet, but that may come in the next 5 years or so.
No,
But
but you might have
that being
a heart failure if you're a man. They said that some of them were having a conjunctive heart failure one, and then some of them were having what LeBron's son have?
I don't know what he
Um,
had, but myocarditis was a side effect of the vaccine
yeah,
that is
so
in relation to your heart. So with respect to that, yeah, it's not pushed anymore because we're largely vaccinated against it. You can continue to vaccinate against like every variant that comes out, but that's largely not practical because variants are just mutations of the original virus. I believe each variant became less and less deadly, so then therefore you see less deaths. And again, that herd immunity that we kind of have at this point, we do see, less cases. We still do see hotspots in certain areas that like small outbreaks in schools and things of that nature. But it's not pushed anymore because we're largely vaccinated against it. And the small changes that do come out from variants, your body can tolerate and still recognize as COVID. This is thanks to your memory cells. And because memory cells decay, or I believe they're a type of like antigens are a type of protein that are released inside the blood, and they stay there for not antigens, sorry, antibodies. They stay there for so long, and then they're broken down by the body, hence the need for boosters. This reintroduces it to the body and it allows for the production again of antibodies that are in the blood. So that's kind of the thought process behind boosters for one. So as new variants are coming out, your body's still keeping up and it's ready to continue this fight, this constantly evolving fight. And then as it pertains to symptoms, myocarditis is rarely acute and it's rarely chronic. You may see slight inflammation over a small time frame and then it returns to normal. And if the in the event that it is like long-lasting myocarditis, most people live with myocarditis and have zero issues. It doesn't affect them in their day-to-day life. Um, for one, for two, let's see, what else? Yeah, the symptoms don't necessarily justify not getting the vaccine, in my opinion. And it's reasonable to think that if you're exposed, so there's different types of vaccines. If you're exposed to an attenuated virus, which is just a weakened one, or you're exposed to the mRNA vaccine, where your own ribosomes are used to create DNA, sorry, not DNA, but protein signatures of that virus that your body can learn. Whatever instance of a vaccine that you're exposed to, if your body reacts that negatively to something that's weakened, to something that can't replicate, or just merely protein signatures, imagine what it would do if you were exposed to the actual virus. No, no holds barred. If it was actually replicating inside your system, it makes sense to me. And of course, we may need to consult a medical professional on this. But if I receive a protein signature of a virus and my heart inflames, or I develop Guillain-Barré syndrome, or I develop, whatever symptom, it makes sense to me at least that if I get exposed to the actual live virus, I'm more than likely going to develop those symptoms anyway, and they're going to be in probably more severe manner where my life is potentially being threatened. So yeah, that's a little bit rationale behind like you might as well get the vaccine, introduce your body in a very, gradual steps, easy way, because in the event that you actually get, why would you take the full load to the face when you can just, bite around the edges? So
that's a wild statement. No diddy. That being said, it's like so. Here's my rebuttal, right? Quite literally, before the vaccine even came out, right? It came out, I think, Trump was able to push these places to get it out like December, like I think it's a month after the election. Um, I think he called it like Project Warp Speed or something like that,
Yeah,
or
after he denied the existence of the virus and then told people to drink bleach after that.
he didn't tell people to drink bleach. He said that he was taking hydroxychloroquine specifically. Let's not take people's words out of context. People do that too much. Now, that being said, yeah, which they ended up doing some studies. Hydroxychloroquine did technically help with
Same as
symptoms
ivermectin, right?
with symptom. I'm just saying. Anyways, we're gonna continue forward, right? So most people, by the time the vaccine was released, had already experienced COVID. I would venture to say that over half the country, with how fast COVID was spreading, had already experienced COVID, whether they knew it and had symptoms or whether they were asymptomatic. So because of that, you have natural antibodies, white blood cell count increases, natural herd immunity is a thing, but obviously it was ravaging our older populations and people with comorbidities, and that just is what's going to happen, right? It also, certain states ran things differently. Florida has the oldest population, but they had the least amount of deaths among old people, which was interesting. But, anyways, that side note aside, it's like when the vaccine does get released, most people have already probably had a bout or interaction with COVID. It was too viral, it spread too fast. Um, and realistically, right? If I were to get the vaccine now, per se, right? Because you said the only vaccine you got this year was the flu vaccine, right? If you get the flu shot every year, right? And you consider the flu shot a vaccine, correct?
Yeah, it's a vaccine.
Yeah, so you get the flu shot every year and you still can get the flu. Like I've gotten the flu shot multiple times and still gotten the flu. But quite literally, nobody's talking about getting a freaking COVID booster
I
this
explained
year.
why.
And you said what?
And I explained why that is.
I mean, I understand, but what makes the COVID vaccination different from the flu shot or flu vaccine where you get the flu shot annually. People get that annually. And I understand you're saying there's memory in the antibodies and your white blood cells, so on and so forth, uh, basically getting used to fighting different strains. But still, people get the flu shot religiously every year. Nobody's getting COVID boosters anymore. If you look at the number of COVID shots or COVID booster shots that are allocated, it's down significantly, and there's more people that get flu shots than COVID. So it's just like at that point, what is the point? Because the efficacy of the COVID vaccine, right? Like I understand you're talking about the antibodies, they remember how to fight it, so on and so forth. But it's like, then why get the flu shot every year? You're basically saying that there's no point in getting the flu shot every year. And at the end of the day, the COVID vaccination, right? If you're not getting it regularly and you're saying, oh, well, I got it back in freaking 2021, and that's enough to, or 2022, 2021, 2022, around that time. Anyways, and that should basically be good for me like 2 years later. Like, bro, we're almost in 2025. You think that the efficacy of that vaccine in your system, number one, is just as high as it was when you got it, and then you still had to get two boosters after? Like, you still think it's that high? Like, they say you need to keep getting boosters for a reason. You were never supposed to stop getting boosters,
Yeah.
but you did. So at
Yeah.
this point, as somebody who's had a bout with COVID, and as somebody who may or may not have, I don't know whether you have or not, but you've gotten vaccinated at this point, I wouldn't say your levels of immunity with you not having gotten boosters in the past 2 years, I wouldn't say it's much different from mine.
Sure. I mean, and that can be the case. But just because people engage in a bad behavior doesn't make it an acceptable behavior. Just because people aren't getting boosters doesn't make it okay that they're not getting boosters. They should be. Same way, you don't have to get a flu vaccine. Just because you engage in a bad behavior doesn't make it the norm, doesn't make it acceptable. And people should still be getting continuous vaccines. You stay up to date on all your other vaccines for tetanus and whatever else, HPV and hepatitis and all that good stuff. Why not continue to do this? You're getting shots anyway. My question to you is, if COVID had the fatality rate of Ebola, would you have gotten vaccinated?
If it had the fatality rate of Ebola, I mean,
Which
but
I
that's
think
a
is
different
about
situation
25%.
because Ebola's spread wasn't as significant.
But that's not what I asked you. I asked you if it had the fatality rate of it, would you have gotten vaccinated?
I'd venture to say probably because it'd be more fatal and I would be more at risk, but based off the symptoms
Probably.
and the
You're
no,
gonna
hold on.
you're
Hold
gonna
on,
you're
hold
gonna
on, hold on,
risk a
hold on.
25% chance of death for what?
Wait, no, 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 no. So I'd venture to say
Just
yes,
say
but
yes.
fine. I said yes, but the point that I'm getting at is
What the fuck?
the point that I'm getting at
Oh,
as
shit.
is literally COVID or before any vaccine would be developed for any new disease that would come out, right? Before
Uh-huh.
any vaccine would be developed, people would already have been fighting said disease. You can't come out with a vaccine overnight. That's a process that takes months, if not years, typically. They're
Sure, yeah, at times it does. And I mean, again,
and what
if
are the
there's
chances
a
that I already
population
would
that
have
is,
fought Ebola, super Ebola that you're
then I
trying to
guess you
tell
were
me
fucking
about?
dead by then.
That
But let's say I social distanced,
exactly.
I quarantined, and I stayed away from people, and I did
But it
like I
don't
was
work like
supposed to
that.
do, right? And then I
It don't
wasn't
work like
exposed to
that.
it up until this point.
I don't
Then
think
when I
there was a
received the
soul that wasn't
vaccine,
exposed to it.
it was that.
I said I don't think there was a soul that hasn't been exposed to COVID up to this
I don't
point.
think that's true. There were plenty of people that didn't leave the house because they were watching their parents and they didn't want to be exposed to it. There are people that knowingly they had like comorbidities and didn't leave the house and encouraged other people around them not to either come in contact or not to leave the house with them, out of fear of spreading this. I think there's
But you
plenty of
still have to
people
go to the
that
store.
benefited
You could
from
still
from
touch
the
an
vaccine
apple
still
that
coming out. What was
you know
that?
what I'm saying? I said you still have to go to the store. You still have to eat food that's prepared
Yeah,
by
again, there are ways like
places.
there were people that I was doing I was working for a food bank at the time during like peak COVID, and we would go drop off food at people's doors, disinfect it, and these were mostly like a lot of people that use the food bank were
You
poor.
disinfected the food. Disinfect
Yeah,
your
we would
Popeye's
disinfect
chicken.
like handles and things on the bag, obviously.
I'm
But the
playing, bro.
thing the thing being like we mostly delivered to poor neighborhoods who guess what? They're more likely to have comorbidities like diabetes because of poor diet and things of that nature. And then lack of access to healthcare in those poor communities. Then on top of that, we mostly delivered to, guess what? Retired people that maybe lived on Social Security, didn't have a ton of money for food. These hyper at-risk populations, but we found ways to not come in contact with them because they were fearful. And even though like they had a 1%, 2% fatality rate, and they were those target demographic, we found ways to engage. That way they weren't exposed to it. There's plenty and social distancing. I don't think it was over half the population. I think that there was and again, even if it was half, that means half of them are already fighting COVID. There's a half that we can still potentially save. And again, in my hypothetical of the 25% fatality COVID, you just think what it's not worth coming out with because we're eventually going to have immunity. I don't think that's acceptable.
I mean, realistically, before vaccines were created, I mean, there's various diseases over the course of history where it's shown, yeah, some of them have ravaged like people, like in decimated populations for sure. But um in
But
other
that's acceptable.
situations, herd immunities have developed and
But
people
that's an
kind of
acceptable when we have the technology to deal with it.
no,
That's
I
acceptable
understand.
now.
I understand. And I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm saying like if you're one of those people who are at risk of death, like in your situation where it's like you have a freaking coin toss of death or like two coin tosses of death basically, it's like at a chance of death, then it's like okay, yes, then everybody should get it. But that's not what was the case. So the hypothetical doesn't really matter. It's
It
for
does
me
though,
as
because the principle remains the same. You protect at-risk populations. I think that it's grossly selfish, and you don't think about not necessarily you, but people that didn't get vaccinated. think about don't fail to consider other people's plights.
I
That's
still
what I
wore
think.
my mask. I wasn't around other people, especially
Why?
people
That
with
had lower
comorbidities.
efficacy. That had lower efficacy than the vaccine, and that didn't stop transmission. Why the fuck would you wear a mask but not get vaccinated?
Well, if I'm sniffling and
And
I
you weren't wearing
sneeze
a fucking
behind my mask,
N95, so that's even lower efficacy.
no, I did wear an N95. Bro, my dad works for Pfizer. I 100% did wear an
Damn, where he
N95.
works. Oh, damn, my mom's a doctor. I ain't have a fucking N95 the whole time.
Dang, that's tough, bro. Very. Yeah, nah. My parents were very, like I said, my parents are very like pro-vaccine, vaccination, so on and so forth. My dad probably has every vaccination known to man in his system, solely because the company he works for, like, they are required to literally have every single vaccination, and he is a huge advocate for vaccinations. So this is actually something where it's like me personally, I was like, I felt I didn't need it. He disagreed. He felt that I should get it, but we agreed to disagree. I'm
Wise
fine.
man.
I'm still here. He's fine. He's still here. Our grandparents, or my grandparents, I should say, all of them still alive and kicking. They took care of themselves well. They got vaccinated. They definitely
Again,
needed
I
it.
think I think your thinking is too small because it could be that you infected that one person because you were asymptomatic. You infected the cashier that took it home to their kids and their kids died. Like I understand that your immediate circle is fine and that's great. And I'm happy for you. But again, I think the scale on which you're thinking is limited.
I mean, but I 100% hear what you're saying, right? But realistically, those people that you're saying I quote unquote could have infected and they died, if they were vaccinated, then wouldn't they be fine? Doesn't that kind of defeat your
Oh,
point?
because you said, and I agree with you. That's why we use the term efficacy. It's not 100%. It doesn't
But
it
exactly, but hold on. If you have a issue with potentially dying from COVID, get vaccinated. If you're vaccinated and I spread it to you, you're vaccinated. Anybody could have spread it to you. At the end of the day, right? It could still spread
but
regardless of
you're
if I'm
taking you're
vaccinated or
t
not.
okay. Okay, that is wrong because you're dictating it based on outcomes. No, you are because you're dictating based on outcome and not actions taken for prevention. The thing is, if I do something and it results in a bad outcome, you could say that that was a bad action. But if I take steps to mitigate a bad outcome and then a bad outcome still occurs, those weren't bad actions that I took. I took steps to mitigate. And just because something negative happened doesn't make the actions I took prior negative. So there's a distinct difference in which you're mentioning. I took steps to prevent me spreading COVID, right? I took steps to stop that, but I still spread it to somebody and I killed them. Oopsie daisy, shit happens. But I tried my best.
But
You
why'd they
not
die if
getting
they were
vaccinated,
vaccinated?
being negligent, and still spreading a disease, those are two very different things. Would you disagree?
Ask Gucci third leg.
Would you
That's
disagree?
ask your question again.
Would you
I'm
disagree
sorry.
that getting a vaccine and accidentally spreading it versus not getting the vaccine and acting negligently are two different things. In both cases, you still kill someone.
I mean, they're two different things, but at the end of the day, if that person is vaccinated,
Oh no,
if they
you're not
no,
hearing me,
hold
Jay. You're
on,
not
because
hearing me.
it matters. If the other person that I infect, quote unquote, is vaccinated and they're 95% protected, why did they die? They shouldn't have died. They're vaccinated. What are we doing? Didn't they get the
No, no,
vaccination
that's
to
great. No, I love
protect
it. I love it.
themselves?
I love that. That's great. No, that's solid. That's solid logic for that first time.
I mean, like,
No,
bro,
absolutely. I mean, fuck it. It's a dice roll at that point. You might as well, right? Sure,
bro,
fuck
I'm
it.
just saying,
Yeah,
if
I'm
they
just
have
fuck it. It's
the
cool. No,
vaccination,
I
why
get what
are
you're
they
saying. That's
dead?
great. No, that's great. That's great.
Me
I
getting the
love that.
vaccination, bro. Let's say I got the vaccination and that 5% still got passed to somebody else who was vaccinated and they die. Why did they die? It's 95%.
Because shit happens. It's just the luck of the
Exactly.
draw.
Exactly.
Maybe
So crap's
God
gonna
didn't fuck with
happen
them. Maybe
if
maybe
they're
your God said it
vaccinated.
was time for
If
them to
they're
go home.
vaccinated, they
That's
have a chance
fine.
of
Like
dying
who are
in
you to question
general.
God's will? Don't question God's will on that. Why did they die? I don't fucking know. Go ask your God. How about
But
that?
but
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 what
the,
I'm saying is the actions that you take to prevent that are a moral good. You acting negligently is not good. So therefore, just because the same outcome occurs does not make the two paths that you don't, it does not make the two paths equal. I want you to like understand that. Those are two very different things, but they
brother.
result in the same outcome.
So let me give you a hypothetical since you enjoy giving me hypotheticals. Let's say you're one person. You're Xavier Dukes. You're in a room full of 100 people. You are the only one in that room of 100 people that is not vaccinated. The other
Yep.
99% of people are vaccinated.
I shouldn't be in that room.
Brother, they're vaccinated. Should they not be protected?
They are protected largely at a 95% efficacy.
Exactly. So realistically, hold.
But you are again back to because you're not grasping what I'm saying
I
here
grasp it. I
because
just
I'm
disagree, brother.
sure that's fine because okay that's fine. We'll agree to disagree, but I'll make some final statements before you can do whatever and sum us up. I believe that as a member of society, somebody that reaps the benefits of said society, you sign a social contract by participating in it. We do this every day with the laws that we choose to abide by as a member of society. We do this through our legal system, through etiquette, through morals, and a shared idea about the direction of the nation. We do all this in our society. I believe that vaccines are part of that social contract, and you owe it to not only yourself, but your neighbors and your fellow members of that society to mitigate risk to them, mitigate risk to yourself, and any actions that you take, like such as speeding, such as drunk driving, which like are illegal because they endanger others. Not getting a vaccine, while I wouldn't recommend that the government that they make that illegal, I would know I would not stretch it that far. But what I'm saying is you take actions as a member of society and you should do so responsibly. And I don't feel like you have any reason other than because you thought in a very self-centered manner, I'm fine, so everybody else should be. I don't agree with that logic. So that being said, I think you owe it to the society that you choose to be a part of. You should operate and play by the rules that see fit. So that being said, I'll pass it off to you. Final thoughts and a wrap up, and we can get up out of here.
For sure. I 100% hear everything you're saying. And for most situations, I'd venture to say vaccinations are a good thing, right? With this particular one, um, is just for me, I think very by and large, I think America is very individualistic, more so than you would, like to say. Um, and because of the individualism and selfishness amongst people, at the end of the day, if you want protection, protect yourself. If you think getting the vaccine for yourself and your family members is the best course of action for you and your family members, do that for you and your family members. At the end of the day, you protect your own. At the end of the day, my body, my choice. That being said, guys, if you agree with X, let him know down in the comments below. If you agree with me, let me know down in the comments below. And then, guys, let us know if you're vaccinated or not. And also, let us know if you ever lost a job due to not being vaccinated. I'm very curious to hear all you guys' stories and insights. Once again, guys, we love you. And we agree to disagree on this. I'm not saying vaccinations are a bad thing. Once again, um, so yeah, if you once again can have a better rate of survival getting vaccinated in certain situations, take care of your health, do it in your best interest. But that being said, guys, please leave a like, subscribe, and share. We appreciate your viewership. If you're still here, guys, we love you the most. You're part of the Inside Men crew, right? And that being said, guys, we are signing off. Peace.
I'm glad you're pro-abortion now. I'll just say that.
No, I said that.